So could artificial intelligence have invented jazz music? So this essay is based largely on a conversation from late last year between Yosha Bach and Ben Goertzel on Consciousness, AI, LLMs, AGI, a Theory of Everything podcast. So a Theory of Everything podcast is a podcast by a guy called Kurt Jamungal, who you can see here at the bottom. It's one of my favorite new podcasts. Definitely recommend checking that out. I'll share a link to it in the essay and also in the description. And then also just this short clip from the New Orleans Jazz Museum about a really special place called Congo Square. So here's that clip now.
Was that enslaved people had Sundays as a day of rest. People gathered in circles, and inside those circles were musicians as well as dancers. There was the opportunity for them to continue their practices that they knew from their homelands. And this was how they celebrated, how they were able to remember. After 1808, the domestic slave trade became very, very active. People had been brought from different locations, from Virginia, from Maryland, from Washington, D.C., from North Carolina. People had been exposed to all kinds of cultures, like German culture to Italian culture. There were a large number of people who were of Haitian descent. And we know that all of those came together in Congo Square. It's almost like a melting pot, almost like a diaspora within itself. And over time, those influences, those musical practices merged and blended to indigenous practices. That means new musical forms. So after a while, we cannot say that it was African music. We cannot say that it was European music. We have to say it was something else, right? And that something else eventually became what we call jazz.
So we'll come back to this story in just a minute, and I promise it will all make sense what that means. Just before we dive into the essay, a few things that are good to know. Feel free to skip ahead if you're familiar with all of these terms. LLMs and transformers, AGI and ASI. A debate that's happening at the moment as to whether LLMs and their current design are going to lead to AGI. And then a last point on flexibly manipulable abstraction. So, LLMs and transformers. LLMs stand for large language models. You're familiar with them if you've played around with ChatGPT by OpenAI or Claude by Anthropic. So a large language model is just a specific type of artificial intelligence. It's the current incarnation of artificial intelligence. It's a neural network, and it uses a transformer design. So a neural network, you can think of like a brain, the neurons in your brain. An LLM, this specific type of artificial intelligence, this specific neural net works by predicting the next word in a sentence. So the transformer is made up of billions of adjustable dials or parameters sending information back and forth through the neural net. The interesting part is that the LLM or the transformer is able to map meaning between words. So next one, AGI and ASI. So artificial general intelligence is human level general intelligence. ASI would be considered artificial superintelligence, which is beyond human level intelligence. Now, I've shared many times before, I've been banging on about the fact that binary definitions are quite misleading. You're better off imagining a spectrum of intelligence. You have narrow at one end, and then more general or superintelligence toward the other end of the spectrum. You could say that humans exist toward the general end because we apply our intelligence across multiple domains. We can read books, we can write books, we can create jazz music, we can take out the trash. This current AI is toward the narrow end. For example, it's good at summarizing existing scientific theories, not so good at formulating new ideas or designing novel experiments or creating a new genre of music like jazz, as we'll discuss. Next thing to wrap your head around is the current debate that's happening at the moment as to whether or not LLMs and transformers, the current design, will lead to artificial general intelligence. So there's currently two camps. Camp 1 believes that language models, LLMs, on their current trajectory are going to lead to AGI simply through scaling up. Not simply, but by increasing the compute, the amount of compute, the data that goes into training, we're going to be able to scale up to some form of artificial general intelligence on the current trajectory. Shared a post here from Leopold Aschenbrenner, who I've talked about and covered quite a bit. And then we have Camp 2. So Camp 2 believes that there's going to be significant limitations in the current design of language models, which won't allow us to scale to AGI or ASI on the current path, i.e. we're going to need a significant shift. So there's very smart people on both sides of this debate, which leads me to believe we're probably going to land somewhere in the middle, i.e. it'll be LLMs with some additional functionality which will lead to AGI and ASI. The degree of change that we'll need or additional functionality is still up for debate. Who knows? And then the last thing to know is flexibly manipulable abstraction. This is just a fancy way of saying that human-like intelligence is flexible and comes from a higher level of abstraction. The unique interactions we have with the world around us. So this is for the people in Camp 2 who think that human-level intelligence can't be replicated because there is this higher level of abstraction. All right, so could artificial intelligence have invented jazz music? So in the conversation between Ben and Yosha, both Ben and Yosha agree that some form of general and super intelligence is coming very soon. When it comes to the debate, Yosha is reluctant to take a definitive stance against large language models, LLMs, in their current form as a potential path to artificial intelligence. He's not saying yes or no. Ben, on the other hand, takes a relatively harder position. He's saying that language models in their current form are unlikely to take us to AGI without some drastic modification. Important to note that both of them are working on AI and both think that AGI is coming very soon. It's just this debate as to whether the current trajectory is going to get us there or we're going to need some significant modification. So Ben puts forth a super interesting thought experiment, which I think helps lay out the debate. If an LLM was trained on all training data up to the 1900s, could it have invented jazz music? So here's a clip of Ben laying out the thought experiment.
I just wanted to pose a thought experiment. So this is about music rather than natural language. But I mean, we know there's music gen, there's similar networks applied to music. So suppose you had taken LLM like Music Gen or Google LM or the next generations and traded on all music recorded or played by humanity up to the year 1900. Is it going to invent the sort of music made by Mahavishnu Orchestra or even Duke Ellington? I mean, would you say that has no new dimensions because jazz combines elements of West African drumming and Western classical music? I think that's a level of invention LLMs are not going to do.
So what do you think? The answer is probably no. If an LLM was only trained on all training data up to the 1900s, it had no exposure to jazz, could it have invented jazz music? So it's worth considering why. The answer is probably no. It's an interesting one. Jazz, as we saw in the video, wasn't just the evolution of two genres of pre-existing music. It was actually the fusion of African rhythms, call and response patterns, blues from the American South, ragtime, European classical and harmony, spiritual hymns from African American churches, brass band, and much, much more. And more importantly than just the music, there's also a cultural innovation that was born out of hardship, of slavery, of oppression, of darkness, resilience, and ingenuity. The very best and the very worst and the very darkest of humanness, what it means to be a human. So here's another clip of Ben expanding on the fundamental differences between human and AI intelligence and creativity.
Capability for making flexibly manipulable abstract representations, I think you will not get something that builds a model of self and other with the sophistication that humans have in their reflective consciousness, and I think that having a sophisticated abstract model of self and other in our reflective consciousness, the kind of consciousness that we have, but a brick or a jaw cell doesn't, right? Without that abstraction in our model of reflective consciousness tied in with our motivated agent architecture, then that's part of why you're not going to get the fundamental creativity in inventing new genres of music or new branches of mathematics or new business strategies. Like in humans, we do this amazing novel stuff, which is what drives culture forward. We do this by our capability for flexibly manipulable abstraction tied in with our motivated agent architecture. And I don't see how you.
So there's some big words in there. Let's break that down. He's basically arguing that there is a fundamental difference between how we human monkeys, how we think about ourselves and the world around us, and how current AI systems process information. So we have this form of flexible self-awareness of ourselves and others around us, and this is developed through our interactions with the world. So while current LLMs will be able to abstract away many of the current things that humans do in the world, this is what Ben mentioned is also in the conversation, it's not going to be able to reproduce truly novel and creative cultural breakthroughs like jazz music yet.